Hi there, I'm David Batshoffen and I host a travel blog called Travel and Things. And at the moment, I'm doing a series called In Conversation With. And this is a first for me because I've never interviewed anybody from an anti-poaching unit. And today, Colin Patrick joins me and we're going to talk anti-poaching, canine, and a variety of other interesting topics. So Colin, thanks so much for joining me. It's really a pleasure to have you in conversation with.
Thank you very much. Good to be here.
So talk me through, everybody knows rhino poaching and anti-poaching units. What is the actual job? What is your actual job in this genre of conservation?
So my job designation is actually a reserve manager.
Right.
This is something that in the last 10 years, from a security point of view, that has become more prominent in conservation. So a lot of security based aspects have been handed over or brought on to reserve managers. So what I do as a reserve manager, I have obviously conservation related management to take care of. But because of the increase in rhino poaching in the last few years in South Africa, it's become quite a big factor in my management. What I do is I manage an anti-poaching unit, and I'm part of a reaction unit on a private game reserve that actually deals with rhino poaching operations.
Colin, is it only rhino poaching, or I know that in certain parts of Africa, elephant poaching has reared its ugly head again, and also lion poaching for bones for certain countries outside of our borders. Let me be cautious as to how I phrase that, where they are used in traditional medicines.
Yeah, so poaching has always been around in conservation. Just hit the nail on the head by saying there's waves. So for certain eras, we're going to have meat poaching as being a big problem, and then it diverts over into rhino poaching and then elephant poaching. In the last 10 years, so particularly from around about 2007, rhino poaching has become a very, very big issue. It's what takes up most of our time in anti-poaching operations. But there's always been, and there always probably always will be, an aspect of meat poaching. We've actually seen in the last 2 or 3 months, we've actually started to see an increase because of the world situation we're in at the moment. We've seen an increase in meat poaching, actually. So yes, there's always poaching. When we talk about poaching, it's basically the illegal harvesting of any animal or plant product in conservation. And it can even involve rare plant species.
Yeah, because cycads are normally the one that everybody knows about when they're sold on the side of the road for a pittance, and then you need to be aware that those things have been illegally harvested.
Yes, and in conservation, we see the flagship species like rhino, and I'm not belittling the anti-poaching aspects of rhino, but as a conservationist, you look at this whole environment, and that is protecting the whole environment. And a plant species is just as important as an animal species like a rhino. So yeah, when we look at anti-poaching, we are looking at protecting this environment from illegal activities.
So how many people in an anti-poaching unit?
So it varies. If you talk to conservationists, there's a common saying. What do we need in anti-poaching? We need boots on the ground.
Okay.
So when we say boots on the ground, it means we need people on the ground that can actually monitor, that can actually protect these areas. But then you've got aspects like financial that actually have a role to play on it. The general statistic at the moment on the game reserves from a security-based point of view is you're wanting one person for every 1,000 hectares. Now, very quickly, you're going to see that that's still a needle in a haystack.
Yeah.
One person protecting 1,000 hectares is still very, very difficult. But that's the current sort of norm at this stage. There are reserves, some of these big reserves, that are operating with one person to every 15,000 hectares. And you can imagine that it becomes a nightmare for protection. And you want to move to a situation of having one person to every about 500 hectares. It doesn't in reality work like that, though. we gather information. One of the big things people think about anti-poaching and anti-poaching units run around chasing people around and catching people. That's a very, very small aspect of it. A lot of what it's about is more proactive activities, proactive in monitoring the species that you're protecting, monitoring your perimeters, managing those species effectively to actually prevent the actual poaching incident from taking place. We don't like to move into the reactional side of things. And the reactional side of things is, unfortunately, once the incident has happened, and the reality is then you're sitting with a dead rhino often, and you've now got to just react to the incursion, or and we don't really want to do that. Most of our operations are proactive, so boots on the ground. So in a general team like that, that maybe gives you your answer. In a reaction team as specific, that varies in what type of operation a person is conducting. My specific role in the reaction team is I handle the follow-up. So I'm one of the people that is on the ground, on what we call on the tracks, following up on the suspects. And generally in a team like that, we like to have about 4 people, and 4 people for safety and 4 people for effectiveness. In that, and then we specialize because of a lot of our incursions will take place and movement of suspects. We actually specialize a lot in knife tracking, which then specializes it even further. And we've realized that at 4 people, we generally handle that effectively. We've got what we call our tracker, which is generally nowadays linked to a dog, a canine. And then we've got the person that protects that handler and the dog. And then we've got a communicator in that team. That's the person that communicates our current position and the activity at the moment of the poacher to what we call an operations room. And that operations room will then coordinate the operation by giving information to various parties so that we can have a whole follow-up operation and hopefully apprehend the suspect because of the information that the tracking team is giving them. And then we have a person who protects the communicator. So it's a 4-man team. Obviously with the canine, it's 5.
Yeah. Or 6, depending on how good the dog is, because some of those dogs are worth more than one person. And we'll get onto that in a moment. But I think from what you're saying, Colin, is that the average visitor to a reserve does not see any of this. I know I've been on walking trails with a variety of different companies, and all of a sudden 2 guys will pop up out of the bush and maybe wave as they walk past you, armed to the teeth, in camo, which you're not at the moment, luckily, thank you, otherwise we wouldn't see you. And then you say to your lead guide, who was that? Oh no, it's anti-poaching, don't worry about it. And poof, they're gone again, And I don't think, as I say, I don't think that the general population that visit a game reserve knows just how much goes into the behind the scenes that makes it safe for them to actually get the sightings that they do.
Yes, no, you're right. Unfortunately, I say unfortunately because I think it could be more visible in that sense. Unfortunately, the general public don't get to see the operations that are taking place every day on the ground. And it is, like I said, a lot of it is monitoring of individuals, rhinos and those sort of things. And the public doesn't get to see that. We have a little bit of a different aspect to that, where we actually want to make people aware of that, and we actually can see that a lot of times those people can actually support us. And I'm not now talking financially. I'm actually talking about people, guards that are on a reserve, landowners that are there. Just by information that they give us, we can actually handle our operations more effectively. So we like to try and publicize that because everybody can help in that sort of aspect. And most of the operations are for security reasons. They are unknown. My wife and I chatted about this a while ago, and in the last 10 years, I've seen my life change because of rhino poaching, because of the security aspect of it. And you ask me, what is the single thing that I think has changed the most? And I'll tell you, it's trust. If you say, well, what do you mean by trust? Well, I'll tell you that I can't trust anybody anymore. Because of the operations that we have to conduct, you literally learn not to trust anybody. Because certain of your operations rely on people not knowing what that team is doing, and that, if that makes sense.
Mm.
So it's quite a horrible thing, because I work a lot on trust with people.
Yeah.
There is always the secrecy aspect of anti-poaching, of it, and people will see these people dressed in camo in the bush, and that those guys are normally, they put into positions as what we call clandestine.
Mm.
So if we, and I can just give you a general sort of scenario of how our day works.
Yeah.
So we've got what we call detection zones in our reserves that we've identified. Those are areas that we can, as effectively as possible, detect an incursion. Now, what we mean by incursion is people illegally coming onto the reserve, normally for the purpose of poaching. So we want to, as quick as possible, detect those people so that we can then initiate what we call a follow-up. A follow-up then that leads to an arrest. So in the mornings, we'll then what will happen is in that same time, we'll be allocating on the ground, either through tracking or various forms. Some reserves use tracking devices on the animals to actually allocate where what we call assets are. So in this case, it would be rhinos. We then allocate where those rhinos are, and then we will position people for the day within those areas, so that they can observe the animal, they can hear for potential gunshots, they can see activity of illegal walking suspects and things walking around. And then in the afternoon, we do the same sort of thing, where we allocate those detection zones. We could also, for example, make use of aerial support, so basically fixed wing or chopper-based monitoring. And so you'll find that, for example, a fixed wing will allocate those animals in the afternoon. They then get channeled through to, if I was the coordinator at that point in time, the positions would get channeled through to me, and then I allocate the teams to those areas so that they can effectively protect those assets. And that goes through into the night, because, there's a common saying at the moment, in the last 2 years, the poachers own the night.
Right.
They're operating and walking at nighttime, and we not. Well, that's changed. That's why I specialize in tracking at nighttime.
Okay.
It's a 24-hour thing. You can't put a time span to this. Yeah.
Are you using modern technology now, like drones and nighttime infrared goggles?
Yeah. So in this, since this has been happening, there's a lot of, we always want to look at better ways to effectively achieve our objective of protecting rhinos, or protecting the species that we're trying to protect. And you're going to find things that come along and things that fade away. Now, technology is a good thing. I'm not a technological advanced person, but I understand the effectiveness thereof. And certain of the technologies, not that effective. There's two things that we say. This is the bush.
Yeah.
And if it can work in the bush, well, then it can be fine. I will tell you that we have every time we look at different technologies and those sort of things, we always divert back to one single thing, and that's boots on the ground. It's people that are physically on the ground. You take a drone, for example. We don't use drones. Drones, at the moment, the drones that we have seen as being available here to us in Africa have been drones that are based. One thing, for example, they work for about 25 to 30 minutes. Now, I've been on operations that have lasted 15 hours. So there you can immediately see time is a big problem.
Yeah.
So in that sort of sense, as if it can work practically, yes, 100%. In our night follow-up operations and thermals and what we call NVG, you've heard of NVG, night vision goggles.
Yeah.
In more particular for us, thermal. So thermal imaging, it's the ability of us to see a heat signature at nighttime. It becomes very important in our follow-ups for our effectiveness, and more importantly for the team safety. On these operations, and like what you said, you might ask me some questions about it on the canine side of things. In these operations, I've walked into situations where my dog has warned me of a suspect at 3 meters in the pitch dark. Now, you can imagine the danger aspect. And then you're sitting with a suspect that's armed with a semi-automatic firearm. It can be extremely dangerous for the team. And so there in those aspects, technology can become very important. unfortunately, very expensive and
Yeah.
not always that easy to get hold of. Yeah.
Okay. Now, that's a nice segue into the canine aspect of this. Some years ago, I was invited by a local security company to go out and watch them train their dogs. They use Belgian Malinois, amongst others. And I was very gung-ho. I said, I want to put on one of those jackets and run and let the dog bite me, thinking that I would be protected. And the head
Yes.
trainer said to me, watch for a while and then make your judgment based on what you see, not on what you think will happen, because the jacket will protect you. And watching guys larger than me being brought to their knees by dogs leaping on them and leaving marks, not breaking the skin, but leaving bruises through those jackets, I decided that discretion was the better part of valor, and I would just stand on the one side and take photographs and record what they would allow me to. Is it the same with your dogs? People are very gung-ho and they think, ah, dog will never injure me, and then until push comes to shove, and as you say, alerts you to somebody in the pitch darkness at 3 meters.
Yes. So yeah, you've mentioned the word Belgian Malinois. That's probably the species, the breed that, from a security point of view, is the most used dog breed in security-based issues. There's various species, breeds that can be used. You know, inherently, I'm in that sense, any dog has the ability to smell, and they can smell far more effectively than what we can. But yes, when you talk about Belgian Malinois, we've got 2 running around here at the moment, and those are the dogs that I use for that. And yeah, a lot of those dogs have the ability to do that, and it can be very scary. To the extent, the specific Malinois that I worked with for a number of years, she unfortunately passed away literally a month ago. But to the extent that I actually would not show people her aggression, because I didn't want to put people off the actual dog. So if I was doing a week's worth of training with people, that Malinois would go everywhere with me and be involved in the training, and she helps promote the use of canine in follow-up operations and things like that. It would only be at sort of on the last 2 days or so that I'd say, well, do you guys want to see some bite work? Because and I think it's exactly what you said. Then they say, no, wait a minute, this thing is not this not cute, cuddly animal anymore. It can actually turn into a machine. Yes, but it's quite interesting, because what we did when we looked at this, and I've worked with some experts in this field. I don't consider myself an expert in the dog handling field. I'm just a dog handler. And I've learned a lot. Inherently, my history is tracking. I love tracking. When a friend of mine who's a dog trainer, he came to me and he said, well, don't you want to have a canine, a dog to help in these follow-up operations? My first thought was, yeah, but I'm a tracker. Is a dog going to come and take my job or what? And obviously now being exposed to it, I've seen how effective it can be. And when you start to work together in a team, and you understand the pros and the cons, the strengths and the weaknesses of each team member, I can tell you it is an unbelievable experience. And it does become a situation, you know, my wife has the saying, she says, it's my second wife. She's obviously my first wife, and I'll say that again to protect myself. But literally, that dog becomes your partner and goes everywhere with you. Because when you've had incidences that are life and death, the understanding that you have subconsciously with each other becomes unbelievable. But in that, if I look at it, you know, somebody said to me, in 10 years, we were talking about it the other day, in 10 years with regards to arrest and things, I've had only 2 incidences, and this includes a number of incidences where I had a combat hand-to-hand physical aggression contact with the suspect. And the same when it comes to a dog. So when we look at the aggression in a dog, it's a tool, not something that we should promote as being used all the time and that. So what we actually do when we look at these anti-poaching based dogs nowadays is we don't add aggression until the end. It's quite interesting that I'm saying that, isn't it? Because think about it. Legally, there's so many aspects of it. And what we realized a few years ago is now I bring this potentially aggressive dog, a canine, to work with the follow-up team. if the team members themselves are afraid of the dog, are they going to operate effectively? And the answer is no. So what we do now is when we're training up a dog, we actually spend, our first initial training is all got to do with tracking, whether if it's a tracking dog or detection if it's a detection dog. And only near the end do we add what we call controlled aggression. So what do we mean by controlled aggression? Well, I only want aggression out of my partner, my canine, for the following reasons. The first thing is to protect itself. The second thing is to protect me, okay? And the third thing is if I wanted to apprehend a suspect that is now through other means not apprehendable. Those are the only three times. So you must remember, if I'm sitting in court, I've got to go prove beyond reasonable doubt why I used aggression in the dog to apprehend the suspect, and so and so. It's not like what the movies show, everything we just let the dog go and it bites the person. There's other means that I've got to fulfill first. So we do that, yeah. So a lot of tracking-based dogs are not necessarily that aggressive-based dogs anymore, but it is a very valuable part. We use the aggression more for actually subduing the suspect.
Okay. Because everybody, I think, is scared of a dog.
An intimidation factor, so we don't have to get to that bite.
Yeah.
Yes.
But I suppose that being said, if somebody was trying to apprehend you using a Yorkshire Terrier, the probability of you continuing to run while this little thing's yapping at your feet, but what you don't know is the Malinois is waiting in the wings. That was just the appetizer. He's on his way, or she's on his way, on her way. How long does it take to train a dog? I mean, you say you've got two dogs currently with you?
Yes, so you can train a dog from 8 weeks old. And you can train it throughout its life. But when we're talking tracking-based training, it is a continuous training, but it could take a couple of months up to a year to get that aspect going. And you first handle the initial training aspect, and then the important aspect comes in when you make the dog operational, because there the dog is learning the experience of operational follow-ups. And operational follow-ups are never dictatable in the sense that it's not. We can't say it's going to happen like this and do this. You're adapting all the time. Yeah. So yes, but that sort of gives you sort of a time span on it. And the big thing is just for the handler and the dog to work closely together. Quite interesting though, in that training aspect, we've had a look at most of did you hear the dogs there? Sorry. Go. Sorry, one of the dogs have just reacted to somebody coming up now.
I thought Malinois didn't bark, Colin.
No, those, I will admittedly, those are not Malinois, those are Irish Wire-haired Terrier.
Yeah, you see, they're the alarm. The Malinois just sneak up quietly. You don't hear them coming because Malinois don't bark.
That's right. No, you're right. We dog lovers, so we've got lots of animals around all the time. Yeah. So basically,
No, go ahead.
So basically, in we're looking at that on just the training aspect and the follow-up aspect, and with regards to that, it's very important what we've noticed. And remember, a lot of these follow-ups can be what we call negative towards the dog. So you've got a follow-up. The dog loves tracking, and that's the rewards that I use. I personally don't use food reward. I don't use a ball reward in my tracking with dogs. I use affection. So I give a lot of affection to my partner, to the dog, when we have a successful follow-up. And eventually these dogs actually become very successful in the follow-ups, and their love of it is in the tracking. But when it comes to follow-ups, hot follow-ups, it can often be quite negative at the end. A lot of shouting, there could potentially be gunfire and things like that. So when we do training, 80% of our training has to be positive. Okay. So we'll do follow-up, training exercise, follow-up people. We'll let the dog run up. We might use the bite suit at the end. We might not, but it's very positive, so that then when it comes to a real follow-up, it doesn't get undermined. Because one of the big things you've got to be careful with using dogs in security-based situations is that it becomes a negative aspect for the dog, and the dog doesn't want to do it. It must be like people; they must enjoy it. Yeah.
Okay. Colin, if people who have watched this and listened to you speak want to make a donation or want to become involved financially, helping train dogs or pay towards the training of an animal, is there somewhere that they can go? Is there a website that they can go to and have a look at?
The big thing that I would say, if you're talking about sponsorship and helping in this anti-poaching exercise, the first thing you want to do is go and do your homework. Go and make sure that you know that the finances, the money that you are giving is going to go to a worthy cause and straight to on-the-ground operational teams. That would be my best advice for you to do that. There's various organizations. I don't think I can mention the names of those organizations, but I think a person must do that. Really go and ask questions about, does it get handled on the ground? Will my support be effective to on the ground teams? And I think you can do that. And you can go and look on my website and things like that. We don't have a financial donation aspect to it. But I think that if there was advice that I would give anybody that would want to support anti-poaching efforts, just do your homework first. Ask questions like, is my support going to be directly linked to on the ground teams? To the extent that you could almost say, give me the equipment or the specifics of what you are requiring, and then you know that you're channeling your funding or your support directly to on the ground teams.
So it's not going to admin. Colin, thank you.
Well, it is important. So admin's important, but I mean it's good.
But you want the majority of your money to be spent where you want to allocate it.
That's right. Yeah. That would be
Colin,
my suggestion.
Thank you so much for being in conversation with, and thank you for your service to anti-poaching and to wildlife in Southern Africa. My guest today on In Conversation with, Colin Patrick. Colin, once again, thanks for chatting to me.
Very good. Thanks. Good chatting to you.